Hi, everyone. I'm Stuart Carden, Artistic Director of Kansas City Repertory Theater, and the moderator of this evening's chat with some really remarkable Kansas City Ballet dancers. So you're at the Kansas City Ballet Dancer Chat. Thanks for joining us. I feel really honored to be asked to moderate this conversation with these artists and dancers, and to be in conversation about Dracula, which is a piece that I'm really fascinated to see, and is source material that has been adapted many, many times, including by me as a director and creator. So I'm excited to get into conversation about Dracula with these dancers in this version. I want to highlight one thing that's happening, and asking Gavin and Fu and Danny to be patient while I highlight one thing that's happening at KC Rep before we get into the conversation. But I would love to share that we are currently in performances. We just opened last Friday of a world premiere called Ms. Holmes and Ms. Watson Apartment 2B. This is a really irreverent, darkly comic, modern take on Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's stories, and on the famous sleuth and sidekick. It's a really fast-paced romp that re-examines the classic adventure stories through a really exciting and bold new female lens, with Ms. Holmes and Ms. Watson being played by women. And they join forces to emerge from the pandemic fog as a deeply codependent, quasi-dysfunctional, odd couple adventure duo, solving mysteries and kicking butts. This is running right now at Kansas City Repertory Theater for 2 more weeks. And please come out and experience Dracula, but also support other performing arts here in Kansas City, including us at KC Rep with Ms. Holmes and Ms. Watson Apartment 2B. That's my pitch. And now we're going to transition into the conversation for the next hour. So this evening's Dancer Chat brings together 3 Kansas City Ballet professional dancers. They're going to share some of their preparation and perspectives on Kansas City Ballet's upcoming production of the popular ballet Dracula, choreographed by Michael Pink, artistic director of Milwaukee Ballet. Based on Bram Stoker's classic Gothic horror story and performed by the world-class dancers of Kansas City Ballet, Dracula is a spellbinding tale of the nocturnal count who survives on the blood of the living. We all know this story. With the combination of dramatic choreography by Michael Pink, an original haunting score by Philip Feeney, dazzling costumes by Les Brotherston, thrilling sets and shocking special effects, Dracula delivers sensuality and danger in a dance theater narrative with story-enhancing sound effects. Kansas City Ballet first performed this version of Dracula in February of 2014 to great acclaim. And now I'm delighted to be in conversation with Kansas City Ballet company members, Liang Fu, Danielle Fu, and Gavin Abercrombie. Hello. Thanks so much for joining me in conversation. We had the opportunity to be introduced yesterday and say hi and talk a little bit about the format of tonight and the conversation that we might have. But I'm really looking forward to being able to actually ask you those questions, hear about where you are in the process of preparing this ballet, get into a little bit of your process, particularly from a theater director. I'm really fascinated in understanding how you approach character in dance. And so I'm hoping that I can ask some questions about that and hear some insights. And we're going to touch on everything from what it's like to come back from this period of isolation because of COVID, back to performing, to details about the process, as well as we're going to get to capes and props and blood as well during this conversation. So I'm going to start off big, and then we'll through the process get a little bit more specific with the conversation. But I just want to say before we kick things off, Gavin, really nice to connect with you. Really nice to connect with you, Danny. Really nice to connect with you, Fu, and to talk a little bit about Dracula and your art form. So here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
So this piece, as I mentioned, I've developed an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. It is such an iconic novel and story. One that even if you haven't read Bram Stoker's Dracula, you know Bram Stoker's Dracula through many, many different interpretations. So I would love to hear, just to start off with, what other versions had you already experienced of this story in whatever medium it might be, whether it was dance or in film or theatrical adaptations, or there's music genre covers of Dracula. What had you already intersected with this story? And then additionally, what research did you do once you knew you were going to be in Dracula and dance Dracula? What research did you do? So open to any of you to jump in to start off with, but I'm interested just to know your history with this story and in its many different adaptations and forms.
Do you guys want to go? Do you want me to start?
Sure. Yep, sure, Gavin, go for it.
Okay. So besides just hearing Dracula, knowing the character just from childhood, I knew this season that we were having the ballet, or we were going to be performing it. So over summer, I was in an airport and just had finished a book and was in the bookstore at an airport looking for a new one, and saw Bram Stoker's Dracula. So I decided, we're going to do the ballet. This might be a fun thing to get. And I did not realize I was going to like it as much as I did. I soaked it up. I loved it. I think I read it in 4 days or something. And then I got hooked and I started wanting to watch all the films, and there's so many films. I have not watched all of the films, but I started with Nosferatu, the silent film, and then I've been working my way. I've watched random here and there, Christopher Lee and Bram Stoker's Dracula, but I wish I could say I did that as research. It was more of just I got super into it, and it's paid off now that we're doing the ballet. But this summer I dove into the Dracula hole, and it's been fun since then, and now it's great actually getting to perform the ballet.
I mean, it's such a influential genre and it's such influential source material. And there's been so many different spin-offs of the original, of course, the vampire genre in general, but Dracula itself has had so many different adaptations and versions. So for you, Danny, for you, Fu, do you have a first memory of Dracula? Would you have a first memory of when you intersected with the story or when you intersected with an adaptation?
Yeah, so, like I said, everybody knows of Dracula, but I never knew all the details. I never read the book and stuff. So my first experience is when I joined Cincinnati Ballet. That was actually my first rep with the company. It was Dracula. So we did Dracula, but it's choreographed by Devin Carney, our director right now with KCB. So that was my first experience, but that was, back in 2008. And Danny was there too. So we both were in that ballet. But I don't think I remember all the details. I just remember it was dark. There's Dracula bites people, and then there was just kind of dark and.
Yeah. Just to touch, that was my first experience as well. I mean, of course, through, school and people being Dracula for Halloween. And it's just kind of always, a theme around that time of year. I knew of Dracula, but hadn't really touched on any movies or, different adaptations until, like he said, in Cincinnati, when we did Devin's version. That was the first time I had ever experienced a Dracula in that depth until now. And as for research for now, we did watch the Bram Stoker's version on Netflix just recently, just to see how the story tied in with what we already are doing in the ballet, and to look at the characters that we're playing and see what kind of things we like, just to pull ideas of gestures or mannerisms or anything that we felt relatable to of the characters in the movie to ourselves as the characters in the ballet.
Yeah, and so you're referencing the one with Gary Oldman, right? You're referencing that film version. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is for those that haven't read the novel, it can be very surprising at first, because it's written at first in diary entries and written in a form that is not traditional narrative. It is basically through letters and diary entries and newspaper clippings that the form of the novel comes out. And so it can be really surprising for those that experience a narrative film first, or a ballet, or a theatrical adaptation, to go back to the novel and recognize that the way it was originally written was actually in that kind of diary and letter form. And so it's quite a feat to adapt it into then more of a narrative structure, a linear narrative structure. So I hope we can get into that a little bit about this version and how that translates from a source material like that into a danced ballet. But before we do that, I am sure people are wondering who you're playing and who you're dancing. See, my theater language is immediately, that's my language, which is who are you playing? You're playing this person. Is that what you all say? Do you say that you're playing someone, or do you say you're dancing a role?
I think usually dancing the role.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Then I will ask you, what role are you dancing?
I'm dancing the role of Mina.
I am dancing the role of Dracula for one cast, and then the other cast I'm doing Lord Arthur.
And I'm dancing Jonathan Harker.
That's great. So in our chat yesterday, one of the things that was shared was that maybe this is the first time playing against type for a couple of you. So what you typically play versus what type of role you're playing right now. So could you talk a little bit about, in each one of you, where your what type of roles you typically dance, and how that may or may not intersect with these characters? And I'm going to do a follow-up question. So that's the first question, which is, in terms of the roles that you have traditionally been dancing, how does Harker for you, Gavin, and Danny for you, Mina, and for you, Fu, Dracula, how does that line up with the roles that you typically play? And then I think my follow-up question would be, I'm interested in knowing if in the process of beginning to inhabit these characters and inhabit their journeys in the story, have there been any personal revelations for you? Have there been any revelations of, oh, I'm close to this character in ways that surprise me?
I guess I'll start. Yes, typically play more villainous evil characters. I've been known for Wicked Witch of the West, the Queen of Hearts in Alice in
Yes.
Wonderland. Yeah, the list goes on and on. It's very like comfortable for me to tap into that. I think originally it wasn't. I didn't see myself as an angry evil dancer. But it was kind of Pandora's box for me. Once it was opened, I was very open to it.
Yeah.
And I learned how to channel that energy and really enjoy the process. But with that being said, Mina is not the evil witch. She's a more reserved English woman, and she is concerned about what's going on, but also can't be so overly dramatic, and she has to hold a lot of her feelings inside of her. Just during that time period, that's kind of what her character is representative of. And so I find that a little bit challenging for me, which is good because it's not something that's in my comfort zone, but I get to journey through that experience. So it's been nice for me to have that challenge and try different things, that, you know, some things work, some things don't, and then you get feedback and then you try to fix it. So it's been fun for me to kind of play the damsel in distress a little bit,
Yeah.
and work on something that's not just very comfortable for me.
Yeah,
And
I'm
I
sure it's a very different type of energy, emotional energy.
Yes.
Could you characterize that or speak to that, the different type of emotional energy that, you know, playing a character like the Wicked Witch of the West as different from Mina?
I feel like so far with the rehearsal process, adrenaline is a big thing.
Mhm.
My natural thing is the adrenaline kicks in. It's great for when you're trying to be fierce and strong and passionate. It's hard to push the adrenaline down when you're trying to be sweeter, softer.
Yeah.
So that's been a challenge for me. But that's what I feel. I feel like all of this heat and rush that I normally feel, and I have to kind of learn how to suppress that.
That's super fascinating. That's really interesting. Okay, Fu or Gavin?
Sure, I'll just go since I'm over here. Yeah, so you know how like we usually do a lot of classical ballet, you know, in the ballet world. Like, you know, sometimes we do full length kind of like Dracula and stuff. So when we do classical ballet, I'm usually casted as like either prince or duke, or, you know, so your emotion is more on a gentle side. And I think compared to this, I always think it's more fun to play the evil role, which is, you know, because I think most of the people like the bad guys in movies or anything, because so like, but I have actually played evil role before too. I played Rothbard in Swan Lake, who is the evil character, you know, made all the swans. And so I did enjoy playing that role. So this time Dracula is not, I don't see Dracula as evil as Rothbard, really. He's, you know, like from all the steps we're doing and the stories I'm seeing, he's like gentle. He's a gentleman, but he needs blood to, you know, survive, right? So he has to do that. But so I really enjoyed, you know, doing Dracula. So it's a little change of scenery for me too, in a way.
Yeah, as a good performer and from my perspective actor, you always it's crucial that you justify your character's actions. So I appreciate that you just justified Dracula's actions. That he's just a gentleman and he just needs blood. That's all. He's not evil, but that's one of the things that we as performers inhabiting other characters, right, have to do, which is we have to live their experience and justify their actions. And I loved, Fu, that you just justified Dracula's blood-sucking actions.
What I'll be thinking when I'm playing the role, I'll be like, okay, so
Yeah.
I'm a gentleman.
That's great. How about you, for you, Gavin?
I wouldn't say that I have a like a set kind of character that I've been known to do or any. I will say that this is one of the most like acting or character heavy roles that I've gotten a chance to do so far. So it is just a big opportunity and a step learning to how to remain in that character and you like with each rehearsal further like my thought process on each moment of the ballet. You know, through school and the beginning of your career, you're always taught to try to be the prince. So there is a lot of just coming out with chest forward, like bravura and like a lot of everything.
Yeah.
And so the real trick is the real acting of subtlety. You know, people can read your emotions and your moves. You don't need to put on a massive show for people to understand superhuman emotions. So overacting or not overacting is one of the biggest, I feel like, learning lessons right now in acting. Because you're on stage, we all tend to at first go very like heavy and hard with our acting. And it's just like learning to reel back when you need to. That's been a big learning process. I do feel like Jonathan Harker, I can relate to, which has made it easier. Not in being like a classic British gentleman, but I feel like he's just a very like for the time period, he's like a normal guy. He's a normal good guy. He's trying to do his job, and he has this, you know, crazy, incredible story, horrific at times story that happens to him. But his story arc is so not just one dimensional, which has been super fun to explore. And going to your point of finding yourself in the character, there's this this scene called The Station, which is at the train station, and I have this briefcase that this is before we go to Transylvania, and you know, I'm constantly checking in it. And Michael, the creator, the choreographer of the piece, he's saying like, you know, if you're going on your train or you're traveling, you're constantly checking for your passport, that kind of thing. You're triple checking, quadruple checking, and which, you know, I was like, I always do this. And then still I seem to always, I triple check, set it down, and then I go to the train and here comes Mina, you know, my better half, bringing me my suitcase that I've checked and left. And the similarities to that in my life are very real because I am the king of forgetting things once I've double checked it. So I was like, oh, okay, this will be an easier part to act. I live this daily. So
that's such a great little window. That small moment is a really great window into you, Gavin.
yeah, exactly.
Thanks for sharing that. I'm really fascinated about this, which is, you know, I love talking to artists in other art forms. I really love working with in a multidisciplinary environment where we're all bringing our own practices and approaches to the art of storytelling. And so a question that came up for me in hearing the three of you speak about your approach to these roles. And just a refresher for those that might have just joined, Gavin is dancing the role of Jonathan Harker, and Fu is dancing the role of Dracula in the second cast, Arthur, and Danny is dancing the role of Mina. But I'm going to show my naivete perhaps a little bit about your art form with the way that I phrase this question. But also reveal a little bit of how we work in the theater. But something that's really interesting to me is understanding, so this is a revived ballet. It's been choreographed. It has a set physical journey to it. And yet there is interpretation, and there is, each one of you talked in different ways about how you act and fill the role. And part of the expression of this story and journey is through the choreography and your technical physical execution of that journey. But then the other part is the acting work, the filling of that set form. And I'm just interested in hearing you all talk a little bit about that part of the process. There's the technical, physical, athletic demands of your art form, but there's also the emotional character intention and point of view work that you do. And I've never really spoken to ballet dancers about that part of it. And I would love to hear, if you have something to share, hear you just talk a little bit about how the process of developing that aspect of the work, and particularly how you work on that with the director. As Gavin, you were referencing Michael Pink and this process, right? Am I getting the right Michael Pink?
Yes.
Yeah. You were referencing Michael Pink, and I would just love to hear you talk a little bit about that. And then really wonderfully, there's a question from the folks that are watching streaming that is kind of a follow-up to that question. So does anyone want to talk about the acting part and how you share a little bit about that process?
Yeah, so you know, as a ballet dancer, the hardest part for us is acting, because we were trained to dance. You know, when I was in school back then, all I wanted to dance. When I joined a company, I'm like, what? I have to act too? Like, that's not what I'm supposed to do. I don't know how to do that. So, but it's really, it makes you feel really good when you actually, I mean, in a way, you're not really acting. You're just trying to connect yourself to the character you're playing, which Michael Pink, he's been really helpful. You know, he's in the studio. Ever from the start, he told us, you know, like, guys, you're trying to make a conversation on stage, acting, just, you know, make a conversation, actually talk to each other. So then, you know, you're not just standing there like smiling, doing hand gestures. So we actually have a story you can talk about. Like I said, when I graduated, I want to dance more, less acting, but nowadays I really enjoy like acting, because I want to create that, you know, have that character in me, so I'm actually the character. And yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah, Danny or Gavin, is that a interesting question for you? Is there something you would want to share?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to Fu's point. My first acting role was the stepmother in Cinderella back when I was in Cincinnati. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't see myself as an old woman that's bitter and a little, cuckoo. But after I kind of just, okay, well, I'm doing this role. How do I tap into it? And how do I, who is she and what is her purpose? And kind of just started exploring what she meant to the story, and what she brings to the other characters in certain scenes. It kind of, it pulls you in, and it like builds you up in a different way. The way that dancing has been, building us up years after years of training and, all of that, this is another layer to that to grow into. So it's nice. It's not just having a dance career, you're also having an acting career in a way as you do these types of roles. So it's not just ballet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, kind of adding on to what these two said, but and how you referenced that we have like the steps that we learn, um, but it's not we flat learn the steps and then we like go in and try to plug in the acting. We the acting definitely, it as well as the steps, but it continues to grow. Like we continue to find it and find different areas we like to explore. But and I really think this ballet has done well, and Michael, he's just thought through everything, is that each step there is intention behind it, which makes the acting come easier and more natural. It's not, you're doing this pirouette and this jump, and then next week we're going to work on you being sad while you do it. It's these steps you're doing because in this moment, Mina, you're sobbing and you're doing your variation, or there's a pot of dough I'm getting thrown around by Dracula, and or even just the really subtle scenes where there's characters going in and out, and it's not the craziest dancing, but each step is there with intention. So you always know where, like, who your character is. And so the acting, it just, as you get comfortable, I mean, day one you don't know your steps, the acting is not there, but it comes more and more naturally as you go, because there is it's like a framework for your character, each bit of choreography. So just like layering that on.
That's great. Thank you. That was really interesting and really fascinating to hear you all speak about this. I honestly have like 12 follow-up questions, but I'm going to stop myself from asking those questions because I've just been alerted that we're at about half an hour already. And I'm going to just reintroduce this conversation. This is probably the time, Gavin, Danny, and Fu, that you could go grab a quick drink if you needed to, while I reintroduce the conversation. And then after I reintroduce the conversation, we're going to come back and there's a few questions from those that are watching this live stream that I'm going to ask you before I get back to some of the things I'm really interested about. So I want to welcome those that are just joining us. I'm Stuart Carden, the artistic director of Kansas City Repertory Theater, invited to moderate this conversation. This is the Kansas City Ballet Dancer Chat. And today I'm having a really good time talking with Kansas City Ballet company members, Liang Fu, Danielle Fu, and Gavin Abercrombie. That was all the time you had. We're going to get back to the questions now. So coming from Savannah Daniels, I hope it's okay, I just shared their name. Oh no, I'm sorry, not from Savannah, from Jess Peterson. Is there a segment of the performance that is particularly special to you or that you would call your favorite?
Sure, I'll go. For me personally, I will just have to be the obvious person and say the pot de dough between Mina and Dracula is particularly my favorite part. There's this constant struggle of, does she love him? Is she like kind of scared of him? Where does she fit in? There's this, he's mysterious and she knows he's dangerous, but she's kind of like feels this connection. And it's fun to dance, with your husband and have that moment, in your life, in your career, in your, and it's fully trusting too, like just knowing that when you get into, I can really just like let myself be Mina and not worry, because I know he's yes, he's Dracula, but he's also Fu, and he's behind me and I'm taken care of. And
Yeah.
so it's like it's easier for me to let go because I know that he's got my back. So
Yeah. I mentioned earlier the production of Ms. Holmes, Ms. Watson that we have running at KC Rep. And the playwright, Kate Hamill, is also an actor, and she is in it with her husband. And it's a very similar situation of when we were talking about casting the piece, and it's a double vulnerability, right? You're a playwright and you're acting in it. And to have that trust of your partner in the piece was really important. And it shows up in the comedy, like the risks they take in terms of the comedy of the piece. So that is really, that's really fascinating. That was a question I had for you all a little bit later. And Danny, thanks for speaking to that, what it's like to dance with your partner and also a partner who you might have a complicated relationship with in the story. Gavin or Fu, do you want to speak to that, or are you ready for a next question?
Well, I can speak quickly too. I mean, I agree too. It's always special to dance with your partner or your wife. You know, we've done Nutcracker together before, but that's more, it's not like a story ballet. You know, everybody knows Nutcracker, you just dance happily ever after. But this is a story ballet. So you have to put the character, you know, their things in it. And not only like we have this pa in third act, which, you know, I enjoy. I also enjoy my other parts of Dracula, which there's another part. I have a male duet with Jonathan Harker, which is kind of something that you don't really see on stage. I would say it is always a duet, usually between a male and a female. So this is kind of special that two male that brings the power. And then also there's a struggle of, you know, Jonathan is like being controlled by Dracula. So that's something that, yeah, exactly. That's a great picture for, so that's how it ends with that paw, but that paw is very intense and it's one of my favorite for the whole ballet as well.
And you get to be in control and dominate the
I'm in
dynamic.
control and dominating everyone in the ballet.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gavin, is there for you a special, to use Jess's words, is there a segment of the performance that's particularly special to you?
It has to be that pas de deux between Harker and Dracula for me as well. It's
And what about it?
It's well, one, it's near the end of it is the end of Act 1, and the music is incredible throughout the whole pas de deux, and it builds so well, and it's such a like climactic moment, and it's so dramatic. But at this point, for Harker, he's already, you know, he's been through this crazy experience in Transylvania. He's gone to the castle, and is, you know, there's like the ominous coachman, and then there's the scene where he's first meeting Dracula, and this is when everything gets eerie. He gets drugged, he's loopy, and there's this, he sees, we call them the vamps, but they're like the three evil vampire women.
Vampire Brides. Yes.
Vampire brides, yes.
Yeah.
And we have this whole scene with that, and it, you know, it really starts, you know, setting in like, okay, Harker is about to, you know, it's not going to go well for Harker. And Dracula shows up, mad as can be that these brides are, you know, about to feast on Harker. And at this point, Harker's drained and already out of it. And then he's just trying to get out of this castle, and is just getting worn down, thrown around, and just he's just so outmatched at this point. Like the entire pas de deux, Dracula is just like calm, cool, like no sweat, and I'm stumbling around, and it's yeah, it builds, and it doesn't let go until, you know, the curtain comes down. So yeah, it's a great moment for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I would imagine like that space of vulnerability and that fighting and or giving over of control is probably not a common role trajectory and experience for a male dancer. You know, like that journey is probably not all that common.
Yeah, and getting lifted is
Yeah.
not something I'm used to or very good at. I would say. And so in this point, like the Draculas they literally like flip us over their shoulders and all sorts of lifts. So getting used to that is definitely a big thing. But
That's
being
really
vulnerable
interesting.
is hard. But with it, as you get more tired, your character is getting more worn out and tired. So
Yeah.
like I said, with the intention, it's really easy to get in the zone, especially in that patada, because you are just getting, by the end of it, I've been rolling around, I've got scrapes and real scrapes and bruises, and I'm just like, oh, please don't, and it ends. So
That's
um
amazing. That is such a cool insight. I love that. I'm gonna ask a next question, which you all spoke to a little bit. So no need for all three of you to respond if you don't want to. But from I think Avi Adams, the question is, what was the rehearsal process like working with Michael Pink? So you shared a little bit about this. Does anyone want to speak about the process of working with Michael Pink?
I mean, Fu kind of already spoke about how involved he is. And he really, I mean, he can tell his passion for the story. Obviously, that's why he created the ballet. But he just knows every little detail. And if he does see you struggling with a moment, he does try to tell you what he thinks you need to hear to bring that moment out of you that you're not experiencing yet. He's been very patient, and I think giving us the flexibility to really get grounded with the choreography. And then now that it's like the week before the show, he's really just trying to give us all the knowledge that we need to carry the story through the process.
That's great. Orient us in time. How many weeks have you all been learning this ballet? And when's your first audience?
Yeah.
This is our week 5 now. So we had when we started back after the Christmas break, we had 2 weeks working with Michael, and then he left, and Luz, she originated the role of Lucy in the ballet, and she's the ballet mistress for Milwaukee Ballet. She came for 2 more weeks and finished teaching the rest that Michael didn't have time to do. So we basically, when she left, we learned everything. And then this week, we just started week 5, and Michael just came back yesterday. And we just started doing kind of like a work through with him from yesterday, so he can see the whole picture, like what needs to be, rehearsed more, or like what she said, figure out the storytelling part. And tomorrow we're actually having a studio, what do you call it? Costume run through. So we're going to be wearing all the studio, like a costume in the studio, because there are a lot of quick changes, and everything you have to set on certain side of the stage for you to, because there's a lot of sets and pieces and props involved in this. And then we open next week on Friday. So we have like about a week before we open to polish this to the best it can be.
I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to bring my family and come and see it, and especially after getting to know the three of you a little bit, excited to see you dance these roles. So I'm looking forward to it. You just transitioned us really nicely, Gavin. I'm going to jump in here if that's okay. In advance to the next question. There's a question from Lauren Mooney Gladish, which you just set up really nicely, Fu, which is she says, I saw Dracula here a few years ago, and I remember the red cape from it very vividly. It became almost its own character. And I just lost the screen for a second. I'm back. It became almost its own character. Is the cape in this production? Fu, is the cape in this production? And how hard is it to dance with, she says, an inanimate object and make it come to almost life?
The cape is beautiful, I have to say. It is really long. It gets in the way for sure. The first time we tried it, it's just there's so much behind you, you know, like it's very much, it's not as big as the movie Dracula where he wore that red long cape, but it is really long because we still have to, you know, dance around it. We just really have to find a way not to trip in it. And then, you know, before you do anything, like you can grab it before you start walking, which I have, you know, tripped with capes before, you know, in not this, but like years ago in other roles. But, you know, like the choreography, it's made for you to use the cape like your wing, you know, you can like, it looks like you're flying.
It's a part of you.
It's yeah, it's part of us.
It's an extension of Dracula.
And there are different kind of capes too. There's another one that one scene the cape is not as, because we have like the red coat. One is really thick, heavy one is lighter one, which in one scene when you see us, there's like air blowing, so it really makes it look like we're like flying. So
that's cool. And you're just starting to work with it, is that right? So you're just starting to work with it, or it's the piece. So you're doing a costume run tomorrow, but it's one of the pieces that you had already been working with.
Yeah, because
okay. So tomorrow you're going to add the wigs,
everything underneath,
other elements that.
Yeah. So the cape we have been wearing for like rehearsals, just because you would need time to adjust, and get used to it for sure. Yeah,
that's great. Is it red?
It's red, yes.
Okay, so it's probably Lauren Mooney Gladish. It sounds like it's the same design from the last time. Yeah, okay. You will be able to see the red cape that you remember, Lauren Mooney Gladish. So I'm going to transition that question about the cape to something you mentioned yesterday that I would love to hear you talk about, Danny, which is, and Gavin, I think you mentioned this too, that you were talking about your briefcase and the passport, and Danny, you were mentioning props. So there's lots of stuff for you all as in this story and as dancers. Can you talk a little bit about if that's unusual and what you're thinking about, or your process of incorporating some of the physical elements and the props that you're utilizing to help tell the story?
Yeah, I mean, it's not unusual to have props, but it is this particular, at least for my character. I mean, all the characters have quite a few props, but this is the first time I've had an experience with so many. And it takes some getting used to, you know, like Fu was saying about having the rehearsal time with the cape. So you can, you know, that takes time, and it takes finding, you know, what works and what doesn't. Mina has, you know, at one point in her solo, she has a cross in her hand. But then while she's starting to dance, she still has the cross in her hand. And then she picks up some books and she opens a journal and she's touching a staircase with the cross still in her hand. And so there's all of these elements. She's on the bed. Then she goes and sits in her chair to write in her diary. And, you know, in a 2-minute solo, we've pretty much touched every prop, and we've sat on every piece of furniture or pulled on the staircase. So it's a lot, you know, we had talked about earlier, you know, it is finding the dancing and it is finding the acting, but then also there's this other layer of, well, where do my props fit into all of that? Because it has to all become a part of you and what you're doing. And what does it mean to Mina? Not what does this book mean to me, but what does it mean to Mina, and how does it relate to what scene I'm in that moment? So yeah, it's just another layer of adding to, figuring out how it all works, and it works for the audience.
Yeah.
Not just for yourself, but if you put a book down and you have to do it in a way that they can see it, or
Right.
So it's not just doing the actual prop work, it's like making it relatable to the story, to the person you're playing, and then also how is the audience perceiving it as well.
That's great. Gavin, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, she said it so well. The one thing is less. This is less a prop and more of a costume. It's same station with the briefcase in the train station. But we'd been rehearsing it. There's like a little moment where Harker and Mina dance together, and then we started rehearsing it in our coats, which almost feel like props because they're like full winter coats. They feel like there's no less, oh, we're dancing in them. So suddenly I'm in this huge fur winter coat and Mina's in this huge, dress, and the partnering is suddenly, the difficulty has escalated like dramatically. So less of a prop thing, but still, negotiating around these like variables, and then, remaining in character and doing the steps correctly it's all, part of the process.
That's amazing. That's great. Thanks for that detail and insight. I'm going to ask a question next that I hope that those that are watching also find interesting. But as an artist whose art form has been so profoundly disrupted by the pandemic, as a theater artist, and my heart kind of cracked in a different way when I was in conversation with Devin Carney about the impact of the pandemic and dancers who have perhaps a shorter timeline in relationship to their art form than theater artists have. The impact of this time away from your art form and art making and audiences. I'm going to ask this question. I'm not going to get really maudlin and sad about this, but I'm going to ask this question instead, recognizing you all have just been through this period, the impact it's had on your work in this art form, and on my own art form and work. What has been the most energizing and exciting aspect of coming back to it with audiences? For you, being away, and yes, you've done short form work, you've done film work, you've continued to train in probably insane ways during this time period. But what has been most exciting and energizing and fulfilling about coming back to performing for audiences?
It's special because, like, we, as much as we enjoy rehearsing in the studio, because that's where you create things and then make things, work and make it well. But I think what we really, as artists, we love, it's that interaction. We perform on stage and hear the reactions, not just applause, but whatever you do, you hear the audience going, or like laughing or something. So that connection is very special to me. Like when we first got back, last year in October, when that curtain first went up after I think they calculated 600 days without being in the theater. Everyone, I mean, that it was serenade. All the girls were on stage and they were all like tearing eyes, you know, it was really cool. Like we were backstage, but we could feel the energy from the audience too. You know, like live performing arts, that's you can't just have dancers, not have audience.
Yeah.
You have to have both. They have to have somebody to appreciate your work. Then we feel like, okay, so this is why we love to do our work, keep working hard, keep going for. So you know, like we were able to do that show in October, and then we did all the Nutcracker. But towards the end, because the Omicron, you know, got worse and stuff, so we were actually lucky enough not to having to wear a mask for pretty much the whole time the show until the last week. So you know, we wore mask, and then you know, for audience, you still see the dancing, but you don't see our facial expression, because that's really important too, especially for Dracula. You know, we're hoping everything, you know, don't get worse. We're hoping everything gets better so we can put the performance out there that audience deserve to see, you know, maskless. Because especially with Dracula, if we wear a mask on stage, really, you can't see half the story.
Yeah.
Okay, so. Yeah,
and I was there for that opening of Serenade, and I felt that too in the audience, what you're describing, that moment. Gavin or Danny, anything that you're thinking about in terms of how this return is energizing you or making you think about your art form in a different way, or anything you want to share about this return to engaging with audiences?
I think that for me, you know, COVID was kind of like a mini retirement. And like people always say, when they retire, you're never ready. And it you know, it's always going to be hard no matter what, but you know, at some point we can't do this forever. We all know that going into it, but that doesn't make a difference, because it's our passion. We love to do it every day. And so I think for me, like I was, you know, we didn't know how it was going to go. And I was always hopeful that we would make it back to this point. And I told myself that I just wouldn't take things for granted. There was, you know, we get caught up in making everything so perfect and getting hard on ourselves, and you know, like, oh, I did this wrong, and oh, this is bad, and we get caught up in this space of like, yeah, we can always do better, but you have to also look at the bright side and enjoy what you're doing while you're doing it, because it can be taken away so easily. And you know, COVID, nobody expected to happen, you know, shut down for so many months and not dance. And we were all trying our best to dance at home. But, you know, it's not the same. It doesn't have that same energy that brings you, it makes you feel alive. And so for me, that was really when I got back into the studio and we felt some sort of normalcy. You know, just try not to be so hard on myself. And, you know, some days it works, some days it doesn't, but keep trying and keep going, and just enjoy the journey.
Danny, that's really moving and really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Gavin, we've got like a minute left. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I just, you know, really, really quick, everything these two guys said, but it's, you know, it's so important, the audience, just for making us feel validated, not even in an egotistical sense, just you know, we're performers. Like I love ballet, I love dancing ballet, but I'm in it to perform ballet to people. You know, I as much as I love ballet, I'm not in it to take ballet class every day for the rest of my career and go home. You know, the build up and then the actual performance is why I'm in it. And getting to do things like this where I'm able to tell a story with the ballet is, and have people receive that in any way that they receive that, is really why myself and I know others are so in love with this art form. So coming back to it has been amazing. It was sorely missed, and I hope it doesn't go anywhere for a long more time.
I agree, and also just feeling a profound sense of renewed purpose in this moment of the power of telling stories and inviting people on a journey that allows them to see themselves reflected, reflect on the world, a sense of their place in the continuum of time, and really great stories invite us all to investigate all that inwardly and also in our relationship to others. And with an iconic work like Dracula, there will be blood. It sounds like it's going to be pretty sexy and as well and sensual. There will be the iconic cape. I understand that now. There'll be lots of props. It'll be beautifully danced, and I'm really excited about, particularly after this window into each one of your processes, and also just getting to know you a little bit in the short time we had together. I'm really excited to see your interpretations of these really iconic characters. And so as we wrap, I will just say that thank you for joining us. I'm Stuart Carden, Artistic Director of Kansas City Repertory Theater, and I've been in this really fun and meaningful conversation with 3 of the Kansas City Ballet company members for the Kansas City Ballet Dancer Chat. And you should come out and see Dracula and see exactly what these artists have been talking about. Company members Liang Fu, Danielle Fu, and Gavin Abercrombie. And I know that this team at the Kansas City Ballet is on top of this and putting details on dates and how you can get tickets to come and see these really remarkable performers share the story of Dracula. This has been so fun. Gavin, thank you. Danny, thank you. Fu, thank you. This has been really fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stuart.